Dark money is unaccountable money that seeps into the political process and changes our politics without us knowing anything about it, really. A great example of the way in which dark money has changed our politics and fueled the rise of populism is George Soros. The whole myth around Soros, this billionaire philanthropist, as this kind of evil guy who wants to take over the world. And that's become a real trope, not just in the rise of American politics, but across Europe. What's really interesting is how that myth has taken hold in certain places. And more than anywhere else, it's taken hold in Hungary. And Hungary is a country in which Soros actually was born. He's a Jewish emigre who escaped the Holocaust in the 1940s for America. And in Hungary, after the wall fell down and in the years kind of leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall, Soros was a big funder of democratic organizations and institutions in this new emerging Hungary. Now, George Soros is public enemy #1 in Hungary. Viktor Orbán, the leader of Hungary, has plastered Soros's face everywhere. He accuses Soros of trying to kind of undermine Hungary, of not being a real Hungarian, of having all sorts of nefarious designs upon the Hungarian people. And it's really worked for Viktor Orbán. He's been in power for over 10 years now. He's unassailed in Hungary. And a lot of the Hungarian population, if you ask them, think George Soros is a really scary menace to their way of life. But how did Viktor Orbán decide to attack George Soros? And I think this is a really interesting story because actually Viktor Orbán initially had been a kind of liberal. He'd actually been funded by Soros in the 80s. He'd been an MP for a liberal party. He'd never been particularly anti-Soros. But in the mid-2000s, when he was out of power, Viktor Orbán met Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benjamin Netanyahu introduced him to a man called Arthur Finkelstein. And Arthur Finkelstein was, for a long time, a senior Republican political strategist in the US. He'd worked for Richard Nixon. And Finkelstein was a really hard-nosed PR man. He really would push it as far as it could go. And what Finkelstein said to Viktor Orbán was, you need to find an enemy, you need a bogeyman, you need somebody that you can tell the people that you are defending them against. As for many years, Republicans in America used to have the communists as the bogeyman. And Finkelstein said you should choose George Soros as that bogeyman. George Soros can be the person that you are defending Hungary against. That whole kind of agenda, the anti-Soros agenda, at the heart of Hungary's politics, and actually lots of other European states' politics too, and that's how it became mainstreamed.
You're probably aware that there are large-bodied predators who are swimming here in our waters. This is the transborder empire of George Soros.
So many of these nationalists are really transnationalists. They're connected all around the world with each other while being very nationalistic. Take the World Congress of Families, Christian right organization set up by American evangelicals and Russian Orthodox fundamentalists. It pushes narratives around the family, huge fearful narratives around immigration. People like Viktor Orbán has addressed it. Matteo Salvini, the leader of the League in Italy, has addressed the World Congress of Families. These groups are involved in things like the World Congress of Families, spend tens of millions of pounds in Europe every year, often unaccountable, on political campaigning. These might be populists and nationalists talking about protecting their own borders, but actually very frequently they get involved in politics all around the world in lots of different places. A really good example of that, and someone I interviewed for my book, is Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon's the ultimate nationalist, railing against the globalists of the world, but he goes around the world doing this. He has links to just about every European right-wing movement, from Hungary to Italy. Of course, in Britain, he was very close and still is very close to Nigel Farage. And Steve Bannon told me when I was interviewing him for my book that when Nigel Farage was thinking about setting up the Brexit Party in early 2019, he came to see Steve in America before CPAC, which is the big conservative Republican annual conference in America. And they sat and they talked about the Brexit Party and how it might be able to succeed. And a few months later, obviously, the Brexit Party topped the poll in a vote for the European election here in Britain. It's not just voters that are voting for populists, it's the populists themselves who are able to connect with one another, able to use money and influence to gain control and to see what works in different places. They learn from one another, they advise one another. All these nationalists are really internationalists.
You all know what he did in the Trump campaign. You all know what he's done to Breitbart News. What you don't know is the help that he's given other movements like mine in other parts of the world.
The story of dark money in British politics, I think, is really the story of the Americanization of British politics. So for decades in America, what you saw was anonymous donations from people like the Koch brothers, who are oil billionaires, really shifted massively the conversation in America on politics. We've seen similar types of politics emerge here. You're seeing anonymous donations going to political parties who are changing their views on things. You're also seeing the rise of small groups of highly motivated MPs like the European Research Group who act as bulwarks for radical ideas within Parliament on the fringes of political parties, what you might call a party within a party. On the right of British politics, for a long time there's been a desire to move away from the European Union and toward the United States. Brexit was a perfect opportunity for that. Boris Johnson has talked about it too. And what's really striking again is what you see with this is a small group of people, often working for think tanks who are paid by anonymous donations, have really been able to shift the political conversation in Britain from 5 years ago, when almost no one talked about the Anglosphere, to in the pages of the Telegraph and similar newspapers. These are the kind of discourses and ideas that are pushed further and further. Dark money isn't just about political donations or even secret lobbying. It's also about how data and the whole online world of politics can be used and manipulated in ways that we as voters just cannot see. You will get targeted adverts on Facebook about politicians. They won't tell you who paid for them, and you will never actually be able to find out how exactly your data was used to find you. But we don't have any laws about online politics, so whatever you do online, almost anything is legal. Politics is migrated online, more and more money is spent online, but we know less and less about it. And that's allowed tech platforms have a huge influence on our democracy. Take Facebook, for example. Facebook has said that it will continue to run paid-for political ads, even if what's in those ads isn't true. It means politicians can really say whatever they want and get away with it without any comeback. And Facebook will also let them target those adverts at very specific groups of voters. All of this adds up together to this change in British politics, where money and influence, unaccountable money and influence, have shifted and changed the terms of debate in British politics. We don't like to think that money can change how our politics is run and even how we ourselves think about issues, but it really can. There's a really good case to say that the 2019 general election in Britain was the most dishonest, the most fraudulent election, I would say, in British political history. We saw a huge amount of lies and disinformation going out on social media. What's really striking is 9 months later, nothing has changed. The laws that govern our politics haven't changed at all. The maximum fine for breaking electoral law is £20,000. For political parties, that's just the cost of doing business. There's almost no laws at all on online politics, even though that's increasingly where parties spend all of their money. The government has said that they are going to reform electoral law, and they've picked one issue that they think is really important, which is voter ID. Even though there's almost no evidence in Britain of any voter impersonation taking place. I think there was 7 at the 2017 general election. So the British government has said they're going to fight a problem that doesn't exist, while they're ignoring the huge glaring holes in electoral law that allow dirty campaigns to take place. And one would almost wonder, is the reason they don't want to do something about it because they think they can gain an advantage from it? I don't rely on dark money to do my work, and Double Down News doesn't rely on dark money to do theirs. So do think about helping and subscribing to support independent journalism that's holding power to account and shining a light into the darkness. Join Double Down News on Patreon.